Hello, and welcome to Biospaces the Weekly. Today, we're going to dive into the fallout from the resignation of FDA Commissioner Marty Makary. That news broke as my colleagues recorded last week's episode, and then several other senior regulators were removed from their posts in the immediate aftermath. We'll also circle back to Revolution's pancreatic cancer breakthrough and give you an update on Regenix Bio and its gene therapy for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. A spoiler alert there, safety issues have again marred otherwise positive results. Speaking of safety issues, there's also continued drama around Amgen's rare disease drug Tavneos. And finally, we'll get another sneak peek at Biospace's analyses of top paid CEOs in pharma. Let's get into it. Hello. You all may have noticed right off the top that I am not your usual host. I'm Jeff Axt, managing editor. We are making a little bit of a change here at Biospace. Heather has run the weekly to great heights for the last 2 years, but she has officially passed the baton on to me. And the other big change we're making is we are welcoming our newest editor to the group, Gabrielle Mason. Thank you so much for joining the weekly.
Yes, thanks so much, Jeff. I'm so happy to be here.
So Gabby joined our team about a month ago at this point, and she's hit the ground running. You'll see her byline. She's in all of our newsletters. She's putting together Gene Pool now, as well as Manufacturing Brief. But Gabby, just as a way of introduction to our audience, why don't you tell us just a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I joined from Fierce Biotech, where I was a senior editor. So I'm not new to biopharma, and I really love this space. Before then, I worked at Becker's Healthcare, where I reported on the pandemic. And I have a degree in criminal justice and creative writing, which is interesting. So very passionate about social reform, patient safety. And in my free time, I love to paint, be outside, anything with the arts, really, except for movies. My movie education I am working on, as Annalie knows, and you guys are starting to learn. A lot of movie references go over my head. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Criminal justice is an interesting background. I hope I don't ever need that personally, but I bet it'll come in handy on occasion with our coverage.
Gabby, I didn't know that you paint. That's cool. What kind, like abstract or landscapes, or what do you paint?
I started out with paint by numbers, and it has evolved into, yeah, like just kind of abstract. I'm not good at very like intricate, like details. People can't do that.
Oh, no, I've just recently gotten back into adult coloring books.
Yes.
So maybe I can evolve from that.
I like
It
both of those things. The adult coloring books are so fun. When my daughter wants me to color with her, I'm like, sure, get me my coloring book. I'll do that. And then I actually did a paint by numbers one time, a very intricate, very detailed lion, and it hangs in my closet to this day. I love looking at that and remembering that at one point I could do painting, but no, it's generally not for me.
It's very cathartic, and I like to listen to audiobooks when I do it, so that's how I get my reading in.
I love that. All right. Well, that's Gabby to everyone. So while we're on this, let's get to our other introductions. Annalie?
Yeah, I'm Annalie Armstrong. I'm senior editor for Biospace, and I do our weekly Biopharm Executive newsletter that goes out every Wednesday.
And I am Heather McKenzie, your former host, now subject matter expert. And I am senior editor here at Biospace, and I put together Clinica Space, which arrives in your inboxes every Monday.
And once again, I'm Jeff Axt, managing editor. And with that, let's get into it. So the first topic of conversations today has got to be, once again, the FDA. So as Annalie and Heather were recording last week and discussing the rumors of Makary's ouster, it became official. Marty Makary did resign as FDA commissioner last Tuesday, and several dominoes have fallen since. So it's not just him. It's also Tracy Beth Hogue, who was the acting director of CEDAR for a good 6 months or so. So acting director turned into a somewhat temporary or somewhat permanent position there. But she has now also left. And then we also have Catherine Zarama, who was acting director at CBER following the exit of Vinay Prasad. She is also out as the CBER director, although we got confirmation from HHS just today that she will be staying at FDA in a different capacity. We also have the chief of staff as well as the chief AI officer, all out of their positions at FDA in the short week since Makary left. So, like I said, I feel like the dominoes are falling.
Yeah, it seems kind of like a bit of a mea culpa, from HHS. They're saying like we were wrong about the whole Makary Prasad tandem. So all these people are going, although we're going to tuck a couple of them in over here.
It's interesting that you say that because I had that thought when McCary left so shortly after Prasad left. I feel like McCary maybe had some ownership over Prasad, who he recruited twice because he also, Prasad only came back after that 10-day vacation last summer at McCary's behest. And of course, Prasad was the center of all this controversy. And so I wondered if McCary had some ownership over that and if there's any relation there. I'm not sure. I'm speculating at this point.
Always thought there's probably a pretty close relationship between those two because they've written a lot of articles together even before their time at the FDA. And as we all know, everything comes back on the boss, right? So, McCary takes the credit or the non-credit for
Right.
anything
Takes
that
the fall.
Prasad did, which was a lot, as we all know.
Absolutely. No, I think there's something there. And we all know that Prasad was the center of much controversy. And after the Moderna gate back in February, I feel like that's when that was kind of the beginning to the end of his reign. Just a month later, they announced that he would be out at the end of April, ostensibly at the end of a 1-year leave of absence. And then, all within weeks of that departure, the rest of this has fallen into place.
Yeah.
That domino effect aside, though, let's talk about a little bit about the reaction from the industry to McCary's exit. I do feel like it's been mostly positive, but not entirely. Heather?
Yeah, it seems mostly positive. It also kind of seems like the analysts are like, okay, here we go again. But last week, Capital Alpha, who has some really interesting insights, they wrote, and this is quote, McCary oversaw what must be the most damaging period in FDA history. So that was pretty definitive right there. And BMO Capital Markets said, quote, this is likely a broad positive for biopharma, given the regulatory inconsistency that defined his tenure.
Yeah, that's the feeling I was getting too. McCary maybe wasn't the greatest FDA commissioner, so his exit by default is positive. I did think it was very interesting, though, that Truist Securities analysts put out there that this isn't the worst, in part only because, like you said, this is the norm. It's just more of the same. And so for that reason, the industry has gotten a little used to dealing with it. And the flip side of that same coin, though, the industry is not happy with the instability at FDA leadership. And they're still clamoring for that stability and they want a permanent leader. And Capital Alpha, again, going back to their note, talked about how it's going to be a real struggle to find somebody who actually wants this job. And I heard on last week's podcast, you mentioned Brett Grior as one of the names that was thrown out there. He actually took to LinkedIn to say, please, no, please leave me out of this. I don't really want this job.
I was joking around earlier with I think it was with Gabby that we should that everyone at FDA should just send a blanket email saying that they don't want the job if they don't want the job, or maybe they should just send around a little form. Am willing to be FDA
Right.
commissioner, not willing to be FDA commissioner. I mean, at this point, it kind of
do you mean like a survey monkey, like one of those?
Yeah, like a survey monkey. I am this much willing to be FDA commissioner. I am not willing. Yeah, but it's definitely a tough job.
I mean, if the industry has its say, they would like Richard Pazdur to come back. So 100 biotech leaders wrote a letter directly to President Trump suggesting that Pazdur do come back as the acting FDA commissioner.
Yeah, this is really interesting and not really surprising. He's very well respected. He's an FDA veteran of, I think, 26 years who actually stepped in to lead CEDAR very briefly last fall. The industry really celebrated this appointment in, I think it was late October or November. But just a few weeks later, Pazdur suddenly left. He later pointed the finger at McCary, saying, quote, the wall between the commissioner's office and the review staff has been breached under McCary's leadership. So with McCary out, maybe he would consider coming back.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Whoever takes the role, though, it may be a while. I've definitely heard a lot of commentary. I mean, obviously, the new commissioner would need to be Senate confirmed. We've talked a lot about the CDC challenges and getting a permanent leadership there. That's still just an acting director. So I don't know how long it will take until we get a permanent FDA commissioner. I have heard that maybe it would be after the midterms at the earliest. For now, though, Diamantis is in charge, and we'll see how that goes. Doesn't have the normal qualifications of an FDA commissioner.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere the first FDA commissioner acting or non-acting in about 50 years to not have a scientific background. I saw this LinkedIn post yesterday from Steve Houston. He said that Kyle Diamantis is getting really dinged as the acting commissioner pick, but he's the first person in 50 years to lead the FDA without scientific or medical credentials. Houston argued that his limitations may paradoxically serve as a stabilizing function because without scientific standing to challenge or try to override career reviewers, he is unlikely to try.
I took note of that too, because obviously one of the complaints about how the FDA is being run right now is the intervention of leadership and oftentimes into departments where they don't have authority. And so, yeah, maybe Diamantis will just kind of be a steady hand staying in the background until the position can be filled. We'll see. In terms of what's at stake, though, McCary started a lot of policy initiatives that I think the future of them is very unclear with him now being out. So just to throw out a couple, we've got the plausible mechanisms pathway. We've covered that a lot. This is for personalized therapies for rare diseases, jumping off of this baby KJ success story last year. McCary also reduced the number of pivotal trials required for approval from 2 to 1. RBC analysts called these pro-innovation initiatives, and I think they were broadly favorable, received well by the industry. But with McCary out, we just don't know what the future of these programs is going to be. I think the other thing that Truist brought up is that we're also in a pretty critical time for PDUFA 8 reauthorization negotiations. So that's another question mark. RBC put it pretty bluntly when they said whoever ultimately leaves this agency will have a major impact on the FDA's overall direction. We are in a time of flux, and suddenly we don't have a leader at this agency. So whoever comes in to replace him will pick up that time of flux, step in at this time of flux, and determine which direction it goes, either continuing in the direction McCary had pushed or in a completely different direction.
Oh, getting back to McCary, he said, he might not have been a good manager, but he did have some good ideas. And the rare disease community has spoken about this. Although I read an article written by 3 rare disease advocates yesterday who appeared to pretty much believe that he just created more red tape. So I guess it really does come down to the implementation.
One thing I have to wonder is, this did seem like it was a long time coming, and there was a lot of discussion that President Trump was unhappy with McCary's leadership. So when he was removed from his position, why didn't they have somebody ready to nominate? It just, you think about how important this agency is and the time of flux that we're in, would have really been a stabilizing force if they had said, he's resigning, but this is who we're going to nominate. That seems like a missed opportunity.
That's a really good point, because rumors first circulated that he might be out last November. And so that was when we started doing our pre-writes for, McCary potentially getting out. And he seems to have survived that for another 6 months. But you're right. If that was even in the conversations that were being had among his bosses, they could have planned a little better.
Maybe they were just waiting for somebody to step up and say, I'll do it. And nobody did.
Instead, people are stepping up and saying, no, I will not do it.
Yeah, I think it speaks to how hard it is to recruit for that job and how no one wants it, honestly.
I mean, even at the CEDAR director role, they had to convince Pazder to step up. He was, the longtime oncology regulator. He seemed happy in that department, and McCary really had to push to get him to step up to the CEDAR role. FDA commissioner is a whole nother level. I don't know who would want it, especially at this time of a lot of controversy and a lot of negative feedback from the industry. So a high spotlight would be on the position at this time. All right, well, that's the FDA. We will keep you updated on those many developments. We will have more leaders coming in and out, I'm sure, all, of course, at FDA Commissioner and at CEDAR and at CBER. These are all acting positions. So we are actively awaiting news of permanent leadership at the agency, and stay tuned to Biospace for updates on that. In the meantime, let's move on to some other topics that our listeners are very excited to hear about. Annalee, you have been doing Biospace's annual analyses on top big pharma executive pay packages. So let's hear what you've got coming up next.
Yeah, for sure. So this is our kind of compensation month. We do this every year where we analyze the compensation of pharma CEOs. Last week, we profiled the highest paid CEOs in 2025. Eli Lilly's David Ricks, of course, came out on top. But this week, we're looking at how those salaries compare to everyday workers at these companies. J&J's Joaquín Duato made the most relative to rank-and-file employees. He had a median pay ratio of 358 to 1. So that means 358 employees stacked up equals his salary, which was $32.6 million total for 2025.
Not too bad.
Pretty big gap.
Well, how about Lilly, though? Lilly is obviously the top earning pharma, or at least the top growing. I shouldn't say top earning. I know J&J took that spot, but with Lilly, with their market cap pushing $1 trillion, what's going on with Ricks?
Yeah, for sure. So Ricks made $36.7 million total. That's, in stock and salary and et cetera, et cetera. They don't exactly take home that exact value, but that's how much his compensation package was worth. So at Lilly, their employees were slightly higher paid overall. So the ratio was only 293 to 1. So again, 293 employees at Lilly stacked up to equal their CEO, David Ricks. So those numbers are a little astonishing. It can be a little hard to swallow that. But then on the other side of the list, we had Vertex's Reshma Kewalramani. She had a ratio of just 80-1. She still had her salary was 21.1 million, but the actual median employee at Vertex was the highest paid with $264,000. So we got the low end and the high end. It's still a little crazy to think about those numbers. And yeah, you can read more about that in Biopharm Executive this week.
I feel like that surprises me more than the spread of the CEO pay packages is the spread of the median salary. Like that's a huge range from that's a pretty good average median salary at Vertex and then some quite low ones at the other companies.
Right. And J&J's median was 91,000, if I didn't say that off the top, which was the lowest. I think that makes sense for J&J because it's a very big company. Like, it's not just pharma. They have medtech, they have healthcare. I think it's just I actually should maybe take a look at the employee counts because I bet that number is really going to skew those values. But yeah, Vertex, very high paying company, good place to work.
But jumping back into the science now, we do want to talk a little bit about pancreatic cancer this week. We obviously talked about it a month or so ago when Revolution Medicines announced its pretty awesome phase 3 trial results that doubled survival. As a reminder, pancreatic cancer is an extremely deadly malignancy. It's usually just about a 13% 5-year survival rate. So to be able to double that survival was huge news. And I feel like the news cycle has continued to say a bit on pancreatic cancer. We got a note just this week from Truist analysts who have nominated Revolution as the quote, the next oncology titan. And of course, that title currently is held by Merck and its blockbuster cancer drug Keytruda. So Heather, I know you've taken a couple of deep dives into what's going on with Revolution and the pancreatic cancer space more broadly. What can you tell us?
Yeah, Revolution or RevMed, as they're called, it's a really cool company. So yeah, they had those awesome results about a month ago, and we are in the midst of a revolution in the pancreatic cancer space. It seems I've already did a deep dive into other companies in this space, and there's really some great data coming out, and some great data that we're going to be hearing. I think at the conferences coming up. Merck, interestingly, the current Titan, reportedly was in talks to buy RevMed for up to $32 billion late last year. So maybe they saw their own worth and they stayed as a single, singular standalone company. But the other thing that I really kind of pressed people on during that deep dive article was that daraxonrasib, or Daraxon, which Truist nicknamed it, has some pretty rough side effects. So I spoke with CEOs from a couple of companies, Actuate Therapeutics and Immuneering, who believe that their candidates can, one, negate this side effect, and two, possibly provide even more time to patients, either on their own or in combination with something like Revolution.
Yeah. So yeah, the Duraxon, that's RevMed's product then, and that's the one that doubled survival. Yeah. No, I did hear about those side effects as well. But doubling survival is nothing, that's huge. And obviously cancer patients care more about survival than the side effects. And so I could see that one moving forward, but obviously plenty of room for growth and differentiation if you can improve upon those side effects.
Yeah, no, when you say it doubled survival, it went from 6.7 months in advanced pancreatic cancer. It's another good thing to point out is that this was metastatic disease to 13.2 months. And that's awesome. There's a lot of incremental gains that are common to the cancer space. And I kind of tend to be a person where I want it all. I want, I want 5, 10 years, I want, or just cure. But that's also a word that oncologists are very careful about using. But yeah, it's cancer conference season, and Revolution is planning on presenting full data from their phase 3 trial at ASCO. And Truist in their notes said that these data, which are supposed to include progression-free survival, overall response rate, and duration of response, could really help to fine-tune treatment duration assumptions for them.
Yeah, we'll have to look forward to those data. And yeah, I'm just excited. If anyone knows someone who's had pancreatic cancer, it's just the most devastating diagnosis. So yeah, it does seem kind of incremental, just an extra 6.5 months on survival. But when the average was only 6 months to start out with, it's still a ray of hope in the space. Pivoting now, though, to bigger safety concerns, not just the relatively, compared to what we're about to talk about, side effects of RevMed's drug, the gene therapy space continues to be riddled with safety concerns. And most recently, this came from Regenxbio. Late last week, they announced mixed results from a phase 3 program for a gene therapy for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And while it did lead to improvements, there were 2 serious adverse events that caused the company's stock to drop by 37% to just $6. So, Annalie, you covered that news. What can you tell us?
Yeah, this was kind of an interesting result. Regenxbio in general is having a bit of a tough year. Last week, they reported what they essentially tried to sell as a major win for their DMD gene therapy. They reported that their trial did meet its efficacy endpoint, but there were 2 cases of serious adverse events, which, understandably spooked investors, sending the shares down. One of those events was liver related, which is always big when it comes to gene therapies. The other was a case of swelling in the heart. Both resolved, but still, this was not a great signal for that trial. Regenx's shares fell 37% after the announcement.
Yeah, liver concerns have definitely been a recurring issue with gene therapies. I mean, we all remember Sarepta last summer. There were 3 patient-related or treatment-related deaths, 2 with Elevidys, the Duchenne muscular dystrophy gene therapy that's on the market, and another one with an investigational gene therapy for limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. But they both use the same viral vector platform, and they were both associated with liver complications. So that is certainly a concern in this space. I'm hoping that these gene therapy makers can improve upon that. That's something that we've continued to watch and looked into. We've got a couple of stories on organ-specific delivery. If you can avoid the systemic delivery, that might be one way to go. More targeted vectors. There's certainly a lot of different approaches that we could take to improve safety, and it's something that people are working on. So we'll continue to cover that. But in terms of the muscular dystrophy space, the positive result is that Regenx did get some good efficacy data, and they're not alone in terms of these late-stage positive results.
Yeah, no, they're definitely not. And I wrote another article that's going to be out in Clinica Space next week, and it's on the DMD space more generally. And there are a lot of companies working on solving these problems with the gene therapies, these safety issues, but also just tons of different other products that are, there's exon skippers, there's lots of different approaches. There's Novartis, which bought Avidity, of course, last year for $12 billion. And they have a highly anticipated readout for actually a different type of muscular dystrophy called DM1 drug that one analyst told me could make or break the acquisition. So that's putting a lot of pressure on one readout. Back to Duchenne, there's Dyne, who recently reported a positive pre-BLA meeting for its exon 51 skipper. And Capricor, who we, of course, talked a lot about in the past year or so, has an August date with the FDA for its DMD cardiomyopathy cell therapy that was rejected last July. So since then, deramiocel has aced a phase 3 trial. So they had a pretty good comeback with that. So yeah, there's a lot of muscular dystrophy drugs that are either currently in review or approaching review now. So exciting year.
Yeah, that'll be really fun to watch. Hopefully we get some more drug options, therapy options, I should say, available to that patient population. Well, finally, we do have one more safety concern to touch on. This one pertains to Amgen's rare disease drug Tavneos. So going back to January, the FDA had asked Amgen to pull the drug off the market due to an issue with the data that had led to its approval. Amgen denied that request. And then last month, the FDA alleged that the data had been doctored. This was all swirling around in the background. And then this week, we have now reports that this drug has been linked to 20 deaths in Japan. Gabby?
Yeah, so the drug has been tied to those 20 patient deaths since market launch in 2022 in Japan. Well, the findings come from Amgen's partner, Kasai Pharmaceutical, and most of the deaths are tied to a complication of drug-induced liver injury. So, kind of despite these new findings, which did prompt a safety alert to providers in Japan that instructed them not to start new patients on the drug. Jen is standing beside their drug. They put out a Friday statement providing further context behind the deaths. Interestingly, though, Amgen, while they issued a release about the drug, which it acquired back in 2022 with a $4 billion cash buyout of a company called Chemocentrics, the pharma did reach out to us asking for their name to be removed from the headline of our story, since Kasai, who markets the drug in Japan, was the one who shared the news about the deaths. Obviously, we did not remove Amgen's name from our story since they are the owner of the drug.
Yeah, that does feel like splitting hairs to me. So yes, but yes, that is good to clarify. Amgen does not own rights to the drug in Japan where the deaths happen. All right, well, finally, last but not least, we always like to check in on biopharm executive. Annalie, you already kind of gave us the update on the exec pay packages, but what else you got going on in BE this week?
Yeah, I didn't want to leave out one of my favorite stories I've written so far this year. I got to tour a radiopharmaceutical facility while I was in Salt Lake City last month. Feels like it's been a year, apparently. But yeah, I toured Nusano's facility. It is brand new, state of the art. They took me through the entire radiopharma manufacturing hall. It was super cool. I got to see the particle accelerator, their ion source, which is how the isotopes are created. And I got to go into what they call the LINAC hall, which is where the actual radiopharmaceuticals will be created. The facility isn't completely up and running yet, so I was actually one of the very few people who's ever going to get to tour like the entire facility and see this in real life. I had so much fun. Everybody over at Nusano was so great. One thing I really appreciated is how good they all were at like describing this in layman's terms for someone like me, which helped me hopefully describe it in a way for our readers that anybody can drop in and check that out. So please check out my story. It was super fun. This took me a long time to put this one together. So you can check that out in Biopharm Executive this week and in Manufacturing Brief, I should say.
You don't want to miss that because you'll see Annalie in a hard hat. So
Yes.
check that.
Yes. And I got to play with like their little simulator that is used to move the targets around. It was super cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for your time and your input. And thank you all for listening. That's all for the weekly this week. We'll see you back next week.